The value proposition around membership in the foundation is early awareness and influence on standards. And we think particularly in standards where there's a public and private sector participation, like you heard earlier in the HEART working group, the iGov standard is also an opportunity where we get hopefully the best of both worlds. So John, of course, is with Ping, but has done extensive work with various governments, which you will hear about forthwith.
Yes, I spend a lot of my life hiding from various governments. So I'm not an American, nor do any of the governments that you're normally familiar with take any responsibility for me whatsoever. So we're going to, hopefully the presentation, look, there we go, will come up. So we're going to talk a bit about iGov, the international government profile that we're putting together. We have a number of participants. There's 3 co-chairs, Paul Grassi from NIST, Adam Cooper from the UK Cabinet Office, or IDAP is what the identity program is called in the Cabinet Office, and myself. A number of other participants from around the world who are more or less actively participating. Sarah in the front here, who I'm sure will be glad to take your questions after, who's actually doing some of the editing on our specs. Thank you, Sarah. And Justin is hiding someplace because he probably doesn't want to hear what I have to say. So we have, we're sort of a victim of our own success. Now that the spec is done, it's good, people have decided, oh, this is way easier to deploy than SAML and some of the other things that we've been doing. Let's roll out and do national EID systems based on OpenID Connect. And these are some of the countries that have actually done that. There's Scandinavian countries, etc. This isn't anywhere near a complete list. I haven't included the UK and the US who are using OpenID Connect for some things. For citizen to government or have immediate near-term plans for doing that. These guys actually have complete citizen EID systems based on OpenID Connect. Chile is in the process of migrating from OpenID 2 to OpenID Connect, but the others already are in production with OpenID Connect EID systems. Take a quick look. This is the Irish one. Call out to Microsoft, who Ireland contracted with Microsoft for their B2C product of Azure. So Microsoft has built a complete citizen EID portal enabling government services, etc., all based on OpenID Connect. If you have had any doubts about whether or not Microsoft is serious about OpenID Connect, they are selling installations through Azure that support many, many millions of credentials. France Connect. It's all in French, of course, but this is kind of an interesting one. Again, the Ireland is both the Irish government based on their, a lot of our countries have civil registries, outside of the U.S., which has kind of an odd notion of identity, where the government at least the national government has kind of an arm's length relationship with it. In other of our countries, we have civil registries and people's identities kind of are given to us by the government. Everybody has a national ID number, what have you. So in a lot of the sort of civil law countries, France, Ireland, etc., it's the national, your national, the passport office or national ID card, civil registry service that's providing you with the login account, which lets you get into government services and in some cases into private sector services based on your account. And common law countries like the US and Canada, the UK, they're more focused on taking external identities to log into government services. So depending upon what your sort of view of the world is and cultural heritage and who you trust, whether it's the private sector versus the government, different places have very different views about what the relationship, who the identity provider should be, what have you. In France, it's sort of this an interesting hybrid because, well, they're French. They had to come up with something unique. I used to drive a French car, which if sometime you want a long and sad story, I'll tell you my relationship with Citroën. But what they're doing, yesterday I did a presentation about Mobile Connect. So in France, what they've done is the government has a portal. It's called France Connect. And they're an attribute provider, and for both for themselves and in some cases for the private sector. But the actual credentials are being provided by Orange and other Mobile Connect providers who are doing strong authentication for you to log into France Connect to then assert attributes to government agencies. So they're both a provider and a consumer in the French case. So again, different countries, different views about what works for them. And when we're putting together these profiles, we need to accommodate some very different views of what these relationships of the parties are, but we want to try and standardize on what's in the profiles. So the purpose of the working group is to develop the profile for OpenID Connect that allows users to authenticate and share their information and have it be supported across multiple jurisdictions. In the UK and in the US, the UK has Connect.gov, which is a hub. In the US, in the US it's Connect.gov. In the UK, what's the hub called? Or the hub? Verify, UK Verify. Sorry. Most people just call it the hub. The idea in those countries, and Canada to some extent, the idea is to blind the IDP to which relying party inside of the government the user is actually going to. So the government runs essentially a proxy service that they call some sort of hub or gateway that then hides what the ultimate relying party is from the identity provider, given that that may or may not be sensitive information, and ideally also blinds the hub to what attributes are going through and potentially who the relying party to who the attributes were coming from, depending upon which particular set of concerns we're talking about. So we have both direct federation examples that we need to support and proxy examples where there's additional privacy concerns being got at because of the various relationships to the parties. So we need to, in this work, support both of those flavors, and there's, again, multiple flavors within the hub architecture. So we want to bring together the people from the various governments to work on this. Also bringing in private sector partners. There have been examples of various governments dictating profiles and then telling the private sector about it later and discovering that none of the vendors actually support those features. Not naming any names, but I may have even been part of that at some point in time. We're trying to, at least the decision by NIST in the UK and the other governments is to try and get out in front of that and do this in cooperation, do it inside the OpenID Foundation with the private sector, so it's not a surprise to anyone once it's done. And that's even changing inside, and a good example is NIST, who are now using GitHub for collaboratively editing SB 800-63. So there's a lot more openness and sort of a change of attitude, more engagement with the public and private sector earlier on in the process. And I think this is part of that. Once we decide what this is, the idea is to have a set of enhancements, because there are optional parts of OpenID Connect. Once we get agreement, then the vendors can add those as standard parts of their products so that they don't have to do different things for different governments, that at least from a protocol level, that the features can be standardized, even though governments may choose to deploy them slightly differently between jurisdictions. Again, one of the advantages of OpenID Connect is reducing integration time. Deutsche Telekom, who worked a lot with us on the implementation of OpenID Connect, they used to integrate all of their internal apps and their external partners using SAML. And what they discovered was it took them on average of 3 months to do a SAML integration. And when they moved to OpenID Connect, that moved to less than a day. And they basically abandoned SAML and ripped out their existing implementations and moved everything to OpenID Connect, just because of the overhead of trying to manage the federations and do integrations. It's also, stops you from getting cavities and all sorts of other good things that we put in OpenID Connect. Don't hold me to that. So again, especially in Europe, where we have EID notification issues, etc. Some of Adam is also part of the European working group on notification, etc. So potentially, especially once we have the proof of possession stuff that I'm working on in OpenID Connect done, then potentially OpenID Connect can also be used as the inter-gateway protocol across European jurisdictions, as opposed to the existing WS Trust-ish, SAML-ish thing that's currently proposed by Stork 3 or whatever the current working group is. So people are looking at that for the intergovernmental interoperability. So we're working on both developing use cases and the actual profiles. The HEART working group has done a bunch of good work on the profile, so we're working with them, also coordinating with the Moderna working group in a lot of jurisdictions. Ideally, the multi-factor authentication that telcos can provide with or without identity proofing ought to seamlessly fit into governments being able to use those credentials for consumer to government transactions. We don't want to accidentally define two incompatible things. If we have, again, like France, where they're actually using Mobile Connect on one side and another form of OpenID Connect for asserting the attributes on the other. We want to make these profiles layered. One of the things that, at least in my opinion, and some people may argue, we've done, governments have done a fairly good job of, good job people will definitely argue with, but at least there are guidelines around e-authentication. One of the things that is underspecified, at least in my opinion, is API access security. A lot of people are using WS Star, Stack, web services, etc. And inside of governments, you'll find that the security of that widely varying, because there is no, or at least has been no, equivalent for API access that SP 800-63 and ISO 29115 has provided for identity on the API access side. One of the things that we're trying to do in this profile is, because they'll be layered, to be able to provide some of that best practice guidance at the API layer as well for just plain OAuth. So that's part of the layering of the standards. And we want to promote harmonization and goodwill and such. Again, the layering of the protocols, supporting both the hub and the direct mesh federations. We have, if you go to the OpenID Foundation website, iGov, there are links to the various documents when we're meeting. We're certainly, even if you're not part of a government directly, anyone is welcome to join the work group. So we'd be happy to have you. And you can always find me on Twitter or, pretty much everyone knows where to find me around the internet. So that's pretty much my presentation. I want to give you a chance to answer some questions before I have to go running off to my next presentation. Or did I do such a good job that none of you had presentations? And Neil is back there going, I really want to ask something, but his heart's pitter-pattering. He's so exciting. Come on, somebody without, yes. Could somebody take her microphone so we can get her on the recording? You're going to be famous. You may already be famous. I mean, what do I know? I once turned down a job with a record company because I didn't know who's the woman with the meat dress? Lady Gaga. Yeah, they tried to hire me to do identity, social media and identity stuff for Lady Gaga, and I didn't know who it was, so they didn't hire me. No, there was a woman back there.
Sorry.
You know, I used to work with the pointed sticks and stuff, but Lady Gaga, I don't know.
I'm UK Foreign Office. You mentioned the requirement, you were working on something about proof of possession to facilitate the requirement for European EID notification. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
So we're working both in the OpenID Connect work group for doing proof of possession ID tokens, sort of in the same way that the mostly overly optimistic SAML web SSO proof of possession spec in a similar way to doing that, but with using token binding and some of the new TLS bound extensions so that we have both proof of possession security and good user convenience. And eventually we will actually go back and retrofit that to SAML, but there's more interest in people adopting it on the OpenID Connect and OAuth side. So we're working with the IETF token binding work group. I just extracted a promise from Google to, in the near term, actually implement the server side of proof of possession for all the Google properties. So that we can actually have some servers to test some of this stuff against. There's a pre-production version of this in Windows 10, a slightly older version of this stuff so if you use Azure properties, behind the scenes with Windows 10, it all actually uses proof of possession tokens. What we have is both Google and Microsoft are using proof of possession tokens for themselves. So now we're trying to take all of that work and standardize it so that other people can take advantage of the security, both for securing cookies and for securing tokens through the browser and in the back channel, so that we don't have man-in-the-middle attacks against tokens. And that's one of the things that the interstate Stork stuff required for gateway-to-gateway communications was proof of possession tokens. So that's being worked on in general in both OAuth and OpenID Connect, and will help with some of those things that have been a problem with some of the Stork stuff. So hopefully we'll be able to do something with that. But if you're interested in the proof of possession stuff, I'm working on it in both the OAuth work group and in the token binding work group, which is most likely how we're going to do the channel binding. Mutual TLS has a bunch of usability problems. That's probably understating it, I know, some of you are thinking. Somebody else over here had questions? Yes.
You talked about people choosing OpenID Connect over SAML for integration and saving a lot of time. Are there some what are the key things that you don't have to do with OpenID Connect that you would have to do with SAML that would save you that time?
There's a lot of fiddling with configurations. Different people have implemented things slightly differently. In people's experience, and obviously I can say, obviously, if you had Ping Federate, it would never take you 3 months to do integrations. I mean, people buy Ping Federate because it only takes you 1 month to do integrations as opposed to a week maybe. Depends on how incompetent your partner is, right? I mean, challenged. So there's a lot more back and forth actually bringing up a SAML connection. A lot more twiddling. There's dynamic discovery and a whole bunch of more things that we're actually have automated in the configuration. There's also a new OpenID Foundation working group where we're looking at further streamlining automated business to SaaS configurations to try and get it down to a one-click configuration for OpenID Connect, so it will, you can do it in minutes with an administrator could bring up a federated connection in minutes with a single or a couple of button clicks, as opposed to, now it may take them hours. But we're trying to make it move in a direction where it's simple and automated. Part of that is dynamic client registration and discovery and all of the things that we have in Connect. Now we had, Ping did Auto Connect for SAML, which did a lot of the same things, and nobody other than PingFed ever implemented. So, it's not that you couldn't do it with SAML, it's just that nobody has ever agreed on what the one way you would fix it in SAML, and perhaps some of the work from the Connect working group on auto-configuring enterprises to SASs may also be able to feed back into SAML, but getting new things into SAML is, well, you probably have your own opinion of that experience. I am still on the SAML SSTC, so we do still work on specs, it's just that nobody seems to actually care. Other questions?
John, let me take the convener's privilege and ask you to talk about the relevance, if any, of the certification work that the Foundation's doing to iGov.
As we refine this, hopefully we will be able to produce tailored versions of the profiles. Certainly, some of the governments on the SAML side, Austria has been leading some of the certification testing on the SAML side. In the identity community, there's really only about 20 of us, and the rest is done with mirrors. So the same testing infrastructure that we have is also being used, the underlying infrastructure is also being used for SAML integration testing by various governments around the world. We're supporting, our testing infrastructure is also supporting the GSMA and their profiles, et cetera. So hopefully we will have, as the treasurer, if anybody feels strongly about it, any governments are we're more than happy to take your directed funding to build test suites, et cetera. They're not cheap to get it done. We have to buy Sarah boxes of cookies and things. So people. So it's the amount of money that we're putting into from the foundation as the treasurer. The amount of money that we're putting in and looking at putting in the future is actually significant. So if people are interested in testing, both make your views known and the best way to make them known is you can write a note on your check that you send to me, and that will greatly help us move forward and be able to buy more time of the developers to get more tests and things rolled out and more cookies for Sarah.
John, how about another
one more
question that I'll ask while I'm taking this up front? How about a timeline? Standards take forever. And
standards take forever, and government work takes twice as long. I'm hoping that we'll have drafts in the next 6 months, etc. Finalizing them probably a year or so from now. But as we narrow things down, hopefully it will help guide the. Obviously governments aren't waiting, given that national EID systems are rolling out on this. So hopefully it can be sort of an interactive process that we can guide those implementations that are underway and be able to influence new ones and come together.
So, not to be too provincial, but I'm curious. I'm with the U.S. government, so I'm interested in what you're doing with the U.S. government with Connect.gov and what else is happening.
Well, we have. So that's my typical Connect.gov answer. Secure Key is part of this work group. Secure Key and other people from NIST, et cetera, have given input. So we're working collaboratively with them. I think, saying much about exact timing of new futures for Connect.gov is not something that I want to speculate on at this very moment. But ideally, and I believe that the deployment, there is some OpenID Connect stuff already in connect.gov for talking to Google, et cetera, though it may not be. Again, many things are OpenID Connect, but not necessarily described as OpenID Connect. They're described in terms of the particular vendor who's implemented it. So there is some stuff, but at LOA 1, we want to, as the profiles become more robust with Paul Grassi and people working on it, we want to be able to move up the stack. I was at the GSA prior to starting the OpenID Connect work, and some of the requirements from the GSA actually wound up being part of the basic design. So there's a bunch of optional features that nobody in the social networking world actually thought were all that interesting. Signed requests, signed responses, non-repudiation, etc. So it is, with token binding, I believe that OpenID Connect will be capable of, at least at a protocol assertion level, of meeting LOA 4 requirements, depending upon exactly how LOA 4 requirements wind up being redefined in SB 800-63-3. But certainly that's the goal. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to sort of move up the confidence level, with the various agencies. But certainly I could easily see a PIV card authentication to an OpenID Connect provider, which then use token binding to, again, relay that assertion and provide ephemeral holder of key assertions between the various parties and have a good user experience, which has been a challenge in the past. So that's, my secret. One of the, Deb Gallagher gave me a task several years ago, and I'm still doing it, but I just don't get paid by you guys anymore. I'm hiding in South America because I am deeply afraid. I'm not. Everybody knows where I am in South America, but at least it's a long way away, so that when the rioting starts, I'm not caught up in it. Other questions? You definitely don't want to know more about my political views. More questions? I think I'm already late for my next panel.
Well, in that case, John will send you off to your next panel with some applause, and thanks to all of you for